Yes. Okay. So to welcome the 30th of April 2020 under a lockdown. Don't ask me I've even lost count of how many days we have been under lockdown. So, a warm welcome from my heart to everybody who's here today, who's taken the time, the effort, and we do have all the time in the world actually. So, utilizing our time in the best of way that we can. So, the topic that we have decided to come up with is fear and change during during a pandemic, a discussion on the healing powers of literature and cinema. Okay, now we picked on this topic because we thought, this is what we are all going through. Okay, this is what we feel fear, and we see things changing around us. So we thought this was the apt topic to pick on. And another thing is that so many of us have never seen a pandemic in our lifetime. So this is the first time, I think this is the first experience we have had with a pandemic. I keep getting that pronunciation wrong. So so we want to discuss, how we feel about it, the fears and changes, and what literature and cinema have to offer. And before I start, we say rest in peace, Khuda Hafiz, to the actor Farhan Khan, and
Irfan Khan.
Irfan.
Irfan Khan. Sorry,
Irfan Khan.
yeah, and the
Rishi
veteran
Kapoor.
actor Rishi Kapoor. So, because we're going to talk about cinema today, now we have first our keynote speaker is Father Alex Katakaya, who is from Don Bosco College at Chirang in Assam. He is the principal of that college. The college is located at a remote tribal area of Boroland. Okay, that is very remote. Anyway, if you say Boroland, everybody thinks it's very remote. And this college was inaugurated just last year with the initiative of Father Alex. He has a PhD, excuse me, from NEHU, Northeastern Hill University. Okay, he's written his PhD on some selected works written about the Indo-Pak partition of 1947, basically partition literature. He is the member of Don Bosco Education Society, specializing in education and skill development of disadvantaged youth all over the world. Okay, and he has lived though he's originally from Kerala, he has lived for 3 decades in northeast of India, and he works among the youth of northeast India. Welcome, Father Alex. And before you give, I can be heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before we call Father Alex to speak. The other speakers are Mr. Sachin Nirmala Narayanan from Dayal Singh College, quite a prominent member of Delhi University, I must say. And we are very glad to have Sachin, because Sachin is one active member in DU, and he's joined Dayal Singh since 2003. He's a keen reader and reluctant writer in English and Malayalam. Professionally, since 2003, he has been practicing participatory learning as assistant professor of English at Dayal Singh College. His interests include the politics and philosophy of creative cultures of people, and also poetry, prose, art, theater, and cinema. Okay, that is Sachin, Mr. Sachin. Hi, Sachin.
Hi.
Okay, then we move over to Dr. Fabian W. Marbanyam. Hi, Fabian. Assistant Professor, teaching English in the Department of English and Communication, Martin Luther Christian University, Shillong. He completed his PhD in English language education from the English and Foreign University, Shillong, which is a branch of Hyderabad. The focus of his work is primarily and language learning and approach to English language education among the what this speech is primarily on oral tradition among the indigenous Khasi tribe, while helping them develop language skills. Has been years of teaching experience. That is the Khasi tribe. He will speak, when he does speak, he will speak on reading as a therapy. That is Fabian, Dr. Fabian W. Marbanyang. Now we move to Mr. Nathaniel Majau. Nathaniel, he is alumnus of the Mass Communication Research Center, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He is assistant professor at the Department of Mass Media, St. Anthony's College, Shillong, and he teaches filmmaking and graphic designing. Now, Nathaniel Majau is also the project director of the Northeast India AV Archive, which is supported by the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Japan, and the government of Meghalaya. Now, Nathaniel will speak. His topic will be AV archiving in times of crisis. I've introduced I don't think we will go into Hina, I'll just give it over to you to welcome the speakers.
Thank
and
you.
everyone.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to welcome Father Alex, Dr. Fabian, Sachin, and Nathaniel, and we really look forward to hearing all of you. Technology has connected us in amazing ways, and I think this is one feature of literature that is so universal and that we can all relate to it. Despite it being such a personal experience, both for the writer and for the reader, it is yet so universal. I don't want to take too much time, and I will just request Father Alex to take over from here. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Katakayam.
Shall I begin?
Yes, begin, Alex. Yeah,
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My fellow panelists, Dr. Fabian Marbanyang from Martin Luther Christian University, Shillong, Mr. Sachin Narayanan, I think, from the Dayal College, Delhi, and Mr. Nathaniel from St. Anthony's College, Shillong, the organizers from the Department of English. I see the names Rupa, Adati, Amit, Kalyani, and Sachin, Renu, Kadisma, and of course the principal, Madam Mia, you for giving me an opportunity to interact with you on this wonderful topic. The topic given for our discussion is Fear and Change Under a Pandemic, discussion on the healing powers of literature and cinema. I'm just given 10 minutes, so I would broadly divide my random thoughts into just 3 sections. The fear of the pandemic, the speculated change after the pandemic. I said speculated change because changes, I'm not too sure what is going to happen, but speculated change, we can all speculate on something or the other. And finally, the influence of performing and literary arts during the pandemic and probably also after the pandemic. Why? Well, fear of the pandemic. Why fear the pandemic? We fear something horrible and we fear something unknown. This pandemic is a deadly mixture of both horribly unknown and extremely new and very novel. That's why they call it what? Novel coronavirus. History has a long list of pandemics in the past. I'm sure you know very well. 1346, the Black Death, cholera 1899, which lasted quarter of a century. 1918, Spanish flu. Spanish flu is being talked about extensively in the last few days because we are making a comparison between Spanish flu and COVID-19. In 2014, not a pandemic, but we had Ebola, SARS, MERS, and I am from the state of Kerala. We had something called Nipah 2018. Very small scale, but very, very deadly, very, very deadly. And 2020, COVID-19. We are sadly part of this. And the best takeaway from this sad event, I guess, would be our masked images, which I think we can possibly pass on to our children and grandchildren. And that, of course, if we can sail through this pandemic unscathed, no idea. I have no idea whether I will sail through it. You also, I'm sure, have no idea whether we will collectively all sail through this pandemic. I had asked the organizers, I had asked Sophia, in fact, whether I should come with a mask. They were kind enough to tolerate me unmasked. Fear is lurking in everyone's mind because all the unknown pandemics put together have taken away between 300 to 500 million lives in the past. No one is able to give us an actual number. 300 to 500 million is what they actually estimate.
Hello.
Today, as of now, has taken 2,27,000 lives and 1,074 in India. I am giving the updates of 2 p.m. I just checked before I joined this webinar. So even as we are discussing, I'm sure some lives are being in the process being lost. Why are we afraid? We are afraid because there is no vaccination, there is no cure, very highly contagious. Symptoms can show up very well even after 1 month of this terrible contagion. I just learned 2 days ago that at least 9 different strains of this virus is discovered in India alone. So vaccination becomes almost impossible. We cannot have one size fit all kind of vaccination because it has to attend to the 9 strains in India, and I do not know how many more strains outside in almost all other parts of the world. So a vaccination will be extensively delayed, at least 1 year. I believe it will take a long time. It is also around the corner. It may come anytime, calling at our doorstep any day. My closest COVID case is just 10 kilometers away from here, and it was reported just yesterday. Therefore, fear factor is, of course, not misplaced, I would like to say. That is my first part. Second, speculated changes after the COVID. Why speculated? As I said before, I have no idea whether what I am going to say is going to be actual or not actual, but we can always speculate on something. There is going to be a new world order after this pandemic. The society at large will undergo a change, hopefully for the better. Human relations will improve. People will realize how little they need. They will realize to value family time, being with children, being with parents. More importance will be given to personal hygiene, respiratory etiquette, as we believe. Social distancing is not only going to be part of our vocabulary. The social distancing is going to be very much part of our behavior as well. There is going to be economic impact. There is going to be political impact. There is going to be environmental impact and economic impact. I'm not an economist, but coronavirus is going to have unimaginable economic impact. I would like to imagine, or I think it is going to be that. Because the whole world is focused only on one thing, that is on how to handle this corona. Everything else is put on the back burner. Most economic activities are come to a halt. Tourism, hotels, service sector, rail, road, aviation, textile, you name any industry, everything has come to practically a standstill. I do not know when it will all pick up eventually. Many of these things are going to go into recession sooner or later. Work from home is going to be the new normal. Education is on Zoom subscription. I was just checking the Zoom subscription. It has jumped from 10 million to 300 million users after the lockdown. 10 million to 300 million users of Zoom, the very program that we are using for our webinar. Socio-political impact. We spoke about socio-political distancing and respiratory etiquette, etc. Masks are going to be trending from 4th of May when we are going to walk out. Hopefully, we are going to walk out if the lockdown doesn't continue. And we are going to be welcomed with a namaste and hand sanitizers rather than with a garland. We were all busy until now. Until now, we were all busy, very, very busy. But now we have learned to pause. We have learned to think. We have learned to listen. We have learned to look around, respect others, respect nature, which we ignored, or we subjugated and ignored all this. Now we subjugated nature, we ignored nature, we subjugated animals. Now we have learned to some extent to respect this. The present scenario, no one can claim to be a winner. Humanity, we as a collective humanity, we are going to be the biggest losers. There is a certain section of society who believe that China has somehow won the first round. China, I don't think, has won the first round or any round at all. China, in fact, is a loser. Socially, they are isolated. Politically, they are isolated. They are being blamed for all these problems. And they are also being blamed for not sharing inputs on time about the severity, the range, and the spread of this virus. China, on the other hand, is on the defensive. China is being blamed for sending substandard or used PPE kits and also giving substandard medication. Credibility of China is also at its lowest step. So I don't buy the argument that China is the winner or China has something to gain from this pandemic at all. On the other hand, there is a great bonhomie, humanitarian cooperation between affected nations. And many thinkers say, many economists say it is going to be to the advantage, to our advantage, the advantage of India. All those who leave China might settle probably in India with their shops, because India is, after all, a democracy and probably more than China. These 42 days, I don't know if my count is correct. I counted 40 days. These 42 days will change the way we think about change. 4 days will change the way we think about change. We always thought that change is conceding to nature, or change is long drawn. Change is a process that will involve lots of economic sacrifice. We also thought that conceding to nature will eat into our economic development. COVID makes us think otherwise. The environmental change brought by this coronavirus was very quick, all of a sudden, and then it was immediately visible. It was visible from the space. The of our ozone layer is now healing, seen from the space. That's what scientists say. The diseases as this continues, there is a great change in the sky above, in the air we breathe around, in nature. Everyone is very, very palpable. And as I said, in very, very short period of time, there is all in all these emissions, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide. There is a 40% fall in all these pollutants, which is a great fall. 40% of the 100%, 40% is gone only during these lockdown days. There is impact on wildlife and biodiversity. The space that we have retreated has been occupied by birds and bees and other animals. Something that we very often hear is nature has pressed the reset button. Most recently, people, just one example, people in Jalandhar were reporting that they could see the Himalayas far away, 150 kilometers away, after 30 years. So people who are 30 years old are seeing from Jalandhar Himalayas for the first time. Internationally, in the West, in some places, they are nature, animals are coming back, birds are coming back. In Venice, they were reporting the waterways which was frequented by the tourists. Now dolphins have come back. Dolphins were never there. In a lifetime, nobody had seen. Now they have come back. So this is impact on nature. And we are coming back to I'm coming to my last part. That is the third part. What is the positive or what is influence of performing and literary arts during the pandemic and after the pandemic? People resort to many tactics during times of anxiety, boredom, and tension. YouTube and our social communications are full of people's very inventive tactics that they do during time of anxiety and boredom. Unlike our ancestors, we have a lot of avenues to spend our time. Some take to social media, others engage in gaming, you do yoga, you do sports, you do walks. And people, another wonderful thing that people do is engage in music, appreciate art, and engage in some creative activity or the other. As I mentioned before, creating art, or those who don't create, enjoying art or works of literature can also be very, very happy and exhilarating experience for every one of us. I'm sure you have seen people in the apartments in Europe were coming together, musicians, many of them playing different instruments from their balcony and making a beautiful orchestra, uplifting the spirits of people. There are many celebrities, some of them victims of Corona themselves, collaborating with other artists, putting together a song or a musical performance, singing songs of courage, of love, of hope, etc. Literature, for example, is not only transporting us to a world of, to the netherworld, as I say, to the world of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet or Wordsworth's nature poetry, but they can also come very close or down to earth, predicting COVID-19. I do not know whether you understand what I'm saying. I'm referring to the fiction of two people, Dean Koontz and Sylvia Browne. I'm sure you have seen it in the social media. Dean Koontz's Eyes of Darkness, 1981, I think, and Sylvia Browne's End of Days, a little later, 2008. They came very close to predicting this tragedy that we are now experiencing. Now, how does literature and cinema assist us during these stress times? For this, I would like to use a little article that I read in American Journal of Public Health, an article written by two persons, Heather and Jeremy. Heather and Jeremy, they explore the relationship between engagement with creative art and health, and how it affects people who are bedridden and ill. And they say there is evidence that art-based interventions are effective in reducing adverse psychological and physiological outcomes. So this is a study done by these two people in 2010. I'm sure outcomes can be there also when we are dealing with this COVID-19. So of these, we can have music, visual arts, and expressive writing. Music probably tops the chart. The most accessible and most researched medium of art and hearing is music, and there is all sorts of music, relaxation music that I'm sure we all enjoy, and all types of music that can soothe our nerves, bring comfort and joy, particularly during this time of lockdown. Visual arts, cinema comes into that particular sector. People either create them or enjoy them. Either you create a cinema or you enjoy cinema. Creating visual arts, creating cinema, artists have an opportunity to express their identity. Their identity is expressed through the cinema, giving them a sense of achievement. Or if you are watching, if you are not creating, if you are watching, it gives to you, it creates a certain affinity with a situation or with a character, thereby giving you a certain level of satisfaction, or as we call in literature, a certain amount of catharsis. That is what visual art does, either creating it or even enjoying it. Expressive writing involves our head, our cognitive, emotional, social, and biological setup. So it involves the whole person, expressive writing. And to this list, I would also like to add engaging reading, not casual reading, but engaging reading. Not all of us are capable of a creative writing. But during this time, when we are all sitting under lockdown, we can at least engage in what we call engaging reading. Involved, very much involved in some good stuff that we read, some good literature that we can possibly read. All of us, as I said before, we are all busy throughout. Before the lockdown, we were all busy having no time for doing anything. Now we have time to sit back, enjoy, and relax. And I would like to conclude with the last, that is a time to become more spiritual. While we engage in these exercises, which helps us to draw closer to the environment, closer to one another, it is also a time to draw ourselves closer to self, to myself. I must draw closer to myself and also closer to the Supreme Being. Supreme Being we call by many different names. We can engage in meditation, we can engage in prayer, in spiritual exercises, which are all abundantly available, and it suits our faith, whatever faith we belong to. It can suit our taste, it can suit also our. I'll conclude with one sentence, which is my favorite. That is from Winston Churchill. If you are going through hell, keep going. If you are going through hell, keep going. Let us jointly keep going through this situation. I am sure we will come out of it. Thank you for patiently listening to me.
Thank you, Father Alex Katakayam from Don Bosco College, Chirang district. Very inspiring. And I hope we take away something from what he has said about, how we should respond to this virus, and how we are hoping that we'll get out of the situation and that none of us, will really suffer. So we're looking at brighter times, hopefully. So thank you, Father Alex. Now, the next speaker is Mr. Sachin Nirmala Narayanan. Sachin, I'm so sorry about that pronunciation.
That's fine.
Narayanan. Okay, Narayanan from Gyal Singh College, Delhi University. And what is it you're going to talk about?
It's basically on the topic only. It's basically about whether there is a therapeutic aesthetics in literature and cinema. Is it audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So, it's about whether there is something called therapeutic aesthetics in literature and cinema. I'm posing this question to all of you while thinking of elaborating on some of the thoughts that I worked out to join this conversation. Though I'm a reluctant Zoomer, we all know about boomers, but now we are in the era of Zoomers. And though I'm very reluctant about being a Zoomer myself, even with my students, I've tried to attend their queries in a different way. But I'm happy to join this. Thank you for getting all of us together. So I'll go straight away into what I thought, I'll be able to share with all of you. We need to acknowledge that we are in a coercive situation or a moment, and we are collectively and individually subjected to the pandemic brutalities. I'm carefully using these terms. I'll come back to most of them if time permits. But this moment also asks us to ponder and pose this question that, is there a change? Of course, there is fear, and I actually believe that it is not just fear, it is a certain kind of terror that we are beholding, we are subjected to at this moment, and there will be change. But what kind of change is entailed along with this historic moment? Is it going to be a new world order or something else? Of course, I'm not denying that there will be change, but I also believe that most of the biases, most of the pre-pandemic brutalities that we are subjected to are going to be carried forward into the into the hereafter, into the future. So that is something that that worries me. And when you look at the etymology of the word therapeutics, you also realize that it actually means that there is someone to take care of, waiting by your side as you undergo therapy. Like there is somebody right next to you taking care of you. So are we going to see a situation of care and compassion, or is it going to be something else? We have already, uh, Father Alex, in fact, mentioned some, aspects of it. We have something called social distancing, used wantonly and quite insensitively. And in a country like ours, where centuries of organized crime has been practiced in the name of caste hierarchy, by invoking social distancing, we are entering a new situation where the same term is invoked in another emergency. I think it could have been, enough if we had used something like physical distancing or mandatory distance for health reasons or something like that. Uh, if you want to read about that, many people have come out with it. I particularly remember Mukul Keshavan's article, and G.N. Devi, Ganesh Devi's article, specifically on these on this term. So, my contention here is that, of course, there is going to be change. As far as the first part is concerned, fear, for me, it is not just a fear, it is more of a terror. And the second aspect of the topic, which is about change, I fear that, the change would be there, but it is not going to be a completely, new world order, a tabula rasa, but rather a continuation and perpetuation of many of the other kind of pre-pandemic brutalities that we already have in our life. So that's my first point. I'm also going to stress on the interesting amalgamation that is there in our topic. It talks about literature and cinema. Literature, of course, for me is more primordial in terms of its reach and in terms of its affinities and characterization, while cinema is of a more modern, and a more recent specificity. So this specificity is interesting because, when I look at how India is fighting COVID, I really believe that, we have a similar juxtaposition of the primordial baser aspects, or primordial aspects, and the new aspects, the modern aspects. What I mean to say here is that, we are trying to fight this pandemic with many of the prejudices that we already have, with modernity, with social medicine, with public health concerns, and science and research, which are quite, which deny many of these prejudices. So, literature and cinema coming together is also interesting in that sense. I think it kind of goes the reflect the epidemiological fight to contain the panic. So, then it entails the question whether there is any real healing power, or in literature and cinema. Is there a therapeutic aesthetic, or is there a therapeutics of aesthetics for literature and cinema? We have to understand that art has been used by many people for many purposes. Of course, it contains redeeming aspects, but at the same time, we should be extremely careful of what is around us. So I will talk some. I'll talk about some text and try to connect it to what is happening around us, very specifically. I thought when Sophie called me for this webinar, I thought, I'll talk about Mary Shelley's work. But then after reading some more stuff, I thought, I'll talk about a curious coming together of literature and cinema. That is basically about Daniel Defoe's book, A Journal of the Year of the Plague, and a cinema by Alfonso Cuarón. Not Alfonso Cuarón, like a cinema by Casals. The Year of the Plague. That's a 1978 Mexican movie. Very interestingly, Gabriel Garcia Marquez has written the screenplay for it. This is a free adaptation of Daniel Defoe's 1722 work. Of course, that work was based on the year 1665, the year of the plague in London. But critics and scholars often debate the very nature of the work, whether it is fiction or whether it is history. And there are claims and counterclaims. And when you read that book, I think very interestingly, it serves both these functions. And when you are aware of literature as an artifice, I think you will more or less see through, or you will be able to see through the technique of the writer, or the way in which Daniel Defoe combines history and fiction in this work. So I'll read something our English literature people would be more familiar with the work, but I thought I'll read something about the film. In the film set in Mexico City, Mexico, you have to realize that Mexico was under the Lopez Portillo authoritarianism of PRI party around that time, and a doctor discovers an epidemic. It's a mysterious illness, but when he tries to warn the authorities about the illness and the very fact that it has portents of becoming an epidemic, he's shut, he's silent. Very similar to what is happening around us in these times. And then the state is trying to control the situation by involving pliant media, and also by restricting freedoms, and all kinds of coercion is applied so that the state is able to make it appear that everything is normal, or as the saying goes in these times in our land, all is well, or sab changasi, when you look at the film, you even have the winter vacation of the schools getting extended so that the pandemic is controlled. The state authorities are able to control the pandemic. So my point is in this movie, again, there is a moment where Marquez is trying to equate the kind of restrictions that we face. Of course, in 1978, there was no such pandemic or an epidemic. It was, and in fact, the mysterious illness later was revealed, later it was revealed that it was due to selling of, let's say, outdated or expired, selling some toothpaste after the date of expiry. So it's a very ironic take. The film is a very ironic take. So what I'm trying to argue here is, art, whether it is literature or cinema, in these difficult times, may not be antiseptic alone. How else can you explain the kind of communalization of the pandemic in India? How else can you explain the rabid, communal campaign unleashed by the state by invoking Tablighi Jamaati as the super spreaders in this country? And when we are, witnessing all this around us, I think we have to be very skeptical of many of these prescriptions. For instance, the very fact that like Mahabharata and Ramayana are given a rerun in national television during this period of lockdown is not so innocuous for me. When you realize how they have how those depictions over the television contributed to the rise of a Hindu majoritarian communal regime in this country, or Hindutva majoritarian communal regime in this country, we really have to question whether the current government is trying to create a second generation or third generation viewers who would be succumbed into the, or who could be lured into this majoritarianism of a dangerous kind. So my contention, the other contention that I am trying to make here is that therapeutic aesthetics is not always possible with literature and cinema. Many a times, you would see that like art, literature, cinema will also have toxic, noxious kind of aesthetics, very pernicious kind of aesthetics. So we have to be wary of these kind of developments. I'm not sure whether I'm exceeding the time limit, because I'm not able to really track the time over my phone.
It's 3:45. 5 more minutes,
like
Sachin, yeah.
5 more minutes. Okay, yeah. So my contention is that like you have seen, like after the Guantanamo Bay torture, like there was a very controversial installation by a Western artist of the a representation of the torture and the tortured. So if you ask this question whether we will be able to heal ourselves exclusively through literature and cinema or any kind of art, my answer is in the negative. I cannot affirm that kind of belief, while we are all witnessing how art and literature are also used to further, to perpetuate, and to even create stereotypes and like divisions and hatred around us. So when the present is so unnerving and iniquitous, what does the future portend for us? What does the hereafter hold for us? So we like the people who are part of this webinar are of course included in the us there. What does the hereafter hold for us? But along with that, there are also tribes and people, people in whose language you don't have a future tense. So all our efforts to zoom in and sometimes have a conversation. I'm not being ironical here. I'm only being skeptical. Sometimes and when actually we are all as part of the education system, when we all see how the government of the day is pushing for a certain kind of online education, it's like really like difficult to be so optimistic about the times that we live in. So like I thought, like I will also mention something that there are many texts that come to your mind. I'm not just talking about Casal's Year of the Plague, or Defoe's Journal of the Year of the Plague. You have Camus' La Peste, or the Plague itself. You have Mary Shelley. You have Quaron's Children of Men. And even I'm coming to my concluding part. Even like the much awaited novel from Orhan Pamuk, The Knights of the Plague, where he he's chronicling the third outbreak of bubonic plague in 1901, and that is due. So we all will have a lot of literature, right? Again, Saramago's blindness. So there are many things that we may find in our arts that give us sometimes warning, sometimes a dystopian picture, sometimes something to hope and something to comfort us. But all these are eminently, questionable, and we need to interrogate them. So, like Pamuk identified the characteristic of pandemic by saying that there are two things. One, there is spread of rumor and false information. Second, like the disease is always identified as a foreign, thing, brought into, like the specified or brought into our place with malicious intent by outsiders. So, like these two, in one sense, while I was not just reading Pamuk's observation on it, I also thought that, like this can be my take on it. I also thought what Pamuk claims as the universal is more specifically the characteristic of the nation state. The nation state relies on a certain kind of rumor and false information always. And at the same time, the nation state is always propping up the figure of the foreigner, the outsider, so that all blame can be put to them. All blame can be finally attributed to them. So that has been the default template in this country for some time. So that is why like of course Brecht talked about will there be music, or will there be singing in these dark times, and answered very clearly that there will be singing, but the singing will be about those times, those dark times. So we have to really understand art, engagement with literature, cinema from that perspective. And I really believe that the default template of these nation states should change. If there is change post COVID novel coronavirus, let that be this kind of a change, where there is less hatred and where there is less nationalistic, jingoistic kind of fervor that doesn't answer any question, but rather find scapegoats and people to blame. When we are faced with that kind of situation, sometimes another poet, Lakshmi Gill, comes to my mind, where she said, poetry is a luxury where action is necessary. We are all in a coercive lockdown. I am not saying that the lockdown is not the way to fight this, but when this lockdown comes with very pernicious, very toxic ideas like social distancing, like what is the social distancing that we need? Or like, it could have been, it is not just a matter of semantics. I certainly believe that in this country where, people of certain castes were asked to be apart from at least the twice born 18 feet apart or more, like then we have to be worried about these kind of concerns. And I believe, I'm concluding, of course, maybe, I've exceeded even that 5 minutes. Yeah. So, I thought, whether you look at Journal of the Year of the Plague, or Casal's movie, or like Closer Home, what is happening around us, there are things that tell us about the ways in which art is part of propaganda. Everything is part of propaganda. What kind of propaganda is there for you to choose from is also a matter that concerns all of us. I hope we all are able to make these choices without coercion and with a certain kind of understanding that will, not answer the question. There is a wonderful book called Pandemic Perhaps. So, it is actually a pandemic. So it is not just a perhaps question. So I believe we all can, use our time to also think about these aspects that I thought, I'll highlight for today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. Very enlightened talk. And I think we've learned a lot from there. Now, I'll just rush because, now we have Dr. Fabian W. Marbanyang, Assistant Professor teaching English in the Department of English and Communication, Martin Luther Christian University, Shillong. Fabian will speak on reading as a therapy. Fabian, you'll have 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Sophia. Now, what I would take from Father Alex's talk is this whole aspect of to pause, to think, to listen, to observe, to respect others and all that. That's one thing. And thank you for the keynote address. That was very, very inspiring. And Dr. Sachin, I agree. I agree with you when you say that forms of art cannot really heal completely. And we have to be quite aware, and of course, be aware of propaganda that comes up from various forms of art. And I totally agree with you there. And what I'm going to talk about is, these fears that we're talking about, and how does reading come into play when we talk about fears? Number one is, see, we're looking at two kinds of people. I'm just looking at the present scenario based on my observation of what's happening in Shillong and around Shillong. And I'm looking at two scenarios. The first one is we look at people without savings, people who have no access to shelter and food, and who are depending on government and other NGOs and other individual parties to help them. Those are one kind of people who actually face real fears because basic necessities, basic needs are not met. That's one kind of fear. Now, let's look at us. Okay, I saw the names here on the chat of people who are actually very current participants of this webinar, and I would assume and I would consider that we are the more privileged ones here. Okay, the more fortunate ones. All right. What sort of fears are we facing? One is, okay, we say we may contract the virus. Two is we may transmit it to our loved ones. All right. All these fears. Okay. Now, Dr. Sachin is talking about social distancing and this whole lockdown also. All these fears have led us into a kind of a behavior that at some point has become irrational. Okay. We have panic buying. We are hoarding. Okay. Some are going through a depression. Some are confused of what must be done next. Okay. The next thing is some people have no fear. That's what they say. We say we are God-fearing people. They say this will not come to us. That's what I've heard. Then Meghalaya says its first case of coronavirus death. Coronavirus case and a death that followed after that. The fear gripped on these God-fearing communities. There was so much fear that they refused a place of burial or a place of cremation to a man who actually served the society. So that kind of fear has actually led to irrational behavior. We are all doing our part. A lot of people are doing their part. Number one is we're talking about government, right? Of course, what's coming to my mind right now is what Dr. Sachin was talking about, this whole propaganda and how TV shows have been used, for certain propagandas and all time. But again, on the other side of what I'm seeing is that governments are taking crucial decisions to contain the spread of this virus, providing shelters, providing food, imposing lockdown, imposing curfews. We have different NGOs, we have religious organizations, we have individual parties who are taking care of those who are left stranded, the poorer sections of society, giving them food, masks, sanitizer. These are the things that are needed. For some, if not most of us here, we do not belong to any of the above parties. We don't. We are quite comfortable in our house. That's fine. We have been blessed that way. We are more privileged that way. So we take it now that we are safe. We have enough supplies at home. Our basic necessities are taken care of. But there is an underlying fear. How do we cope and spend our time during this lockdown? As students of literature, which I think they are participating in this webinar, what can you do? Maybe studying, doing assignments. That's what I'm doing with my students, giving them assignments, having some classes with them online and so on. I'm assuming that you're spending a lot of your free time reading, whether or not for your assignments or not, but I'm assuming that you're spending a lot of your time reading. Now, I'm going to take you to a writer who talks about reading as a therapy. Timothy Aubrey from the University of Iowa. In his reading a therapy, he says that you could read for aesthetic appreciation, you could read to satisfy your intellectual curiosity, you could read to find answer to your psychological needs. He also states that most of the middle class Americans read as a therapeutic tool because of their loneliness. In this way, they create surprising forms of sympathy and solidarity among strangers. My question to you and to myself, of course, now is, why do you read? Why do we read? What happens when you read? What exactly happens when you are in a process of reading? At one level, you look at the cognitive level. When you're reading, you're definitely connecting words together. You're capturing the mood, the tone, and deciphering the intended message of the author. You're trying to make sense. Two important words. You're trying to make sense of what you're reading. Stopper 1969 says that reading as a cognitive functioning states that you as a reader is actively and sympathetically following the ins and the outs of the author. His fidelity to truth, his accuracy and methods train the mind to modes of functioning that are similar to his. So within you, what's happening is when you're reading, you are acquainted with a more effective way of thinking. And as John Locke says, he's the English philosopher of the 17th century, he says, reading furnishes the mind only with materials of knowledge. And here's the punchline. It is thinking what we read does. I would now like to draw your attention to a model of learning developed by Benjamin Bloom in the 1950s. This is commonly known as the Bloom's taxonomy. The Bloom's taxonomy is divided into three levels. You have the cognitive domain, which I think most of you would have heard about this. The cognitive domain, which is very knowledge-based. The affective domain, which is the emotion-based. And the psychomotor domain. So in my opinion, reading creative work and even non-creative work in the prose, poetry, or drama, or any form of article that you're reading, our language faculty, our cognitive domain, as well as our affective domain becomes quite active. Okay? We connect with the words, we understand the context, we connect with what we read, with our background knowledge, with our life experiences, and certain emotional and psychological needs within us have been catered to. Okay, I'm hearing some sounds in the background. Yeah. Okay.
What?
Okay, when reading non-creative work, we need to read events and experiences.
There was something, that's why.
Amit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amit,
there's a lot of noise in the background.
Please mute everyone.
Yeah, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
Just a second. Now you can go, Fabian.
Okay.
Fabian, go. Only you and me. Okay, carry on.
Yeah.
Sorry for this. Please carry on. Amit, please just mute everybody.
Yeah, I did that.
Carry on.
So when reading non-creative works, we read events and experiences. We understand the past. We connect with the peoples and events of the past. For non-creative writing, okay, the act of reading gives us a sense of connectedness. This is where the therapy bit comes in. Okay, gives us a sense of connectedness. It allows us to sympathize and to be in solidarity with the world around us. See, the act of reading itself is therapeutic, but only if you permit yourself to withdraw yourself into a space, a realm that would activate your mind and your emotions. That would propel a higher level of thinking. See, this act of reading in itself is therapeutic. And you can stop here, but you can go on if you choose to move into a psychomotor domain. So what exactly have I been saying is I'm looking at a very, very simple act. Okay, I'm looking at a very, very simple act, which one needs to be aware of, one needs to be conscious of. Many people read, many people take books, but what does that do to them? Okay, does it raise a higher level of thinking? Does it propel people to actually look into problem solving, look into finding solutions? That's what I'm looking at. Okay, but you need to give yourself that space. See, on close examination, we are at a stage, students and teachers and all of us here now, we are at a stage where our lifelong learning, our education, our years of reading comes into play here. This is where we come to a threshold, all right, whether we choose to cross that or not. So what exactly am I saying? Our reading of literature would have helped us develop a rational mind. It would have helped us take a rational stance. And that is what I believe is expected of us. The more fortunate, the more privileged ones here, the ones who do not belong to the category of where we have to actually run for our supplies, run for our wages. Okay, we are salaried people. So at home, what are we doing? The least that we should do is allow this reading to take effect on us. Okay, our understanding of the past would have in turn help us make crucial decisions for our present and our future because of our reading. So we bring everything, all ground knowledge, we bring everything that of the past into okay. It is in this sense that I say that we are expected to be think tanks. We are expected to lead. We are expected to show. We are expected to be an agent in problem solving and finding solutions. See, but not necessarily at the national level. We're not necessarily at the state level, but we can begin using this therapeutic reading to calm the fears within ourselves, first of all, or to calm the fears of our families. Many of us would have elderly people at home. All right, you could tell them that no need to fear, no need to fear, no need to fear. I think those two words would not help. There's no need to do not fear, 3 words. But again, when you bring in everything that you've read and how it's transformed you, that kind of energy through reading that is in you can be actually, you can send vibes of calmness, okay, to your family, to your communities, and to your immediate surroundings. So the therapeutic aspect of reading in this sense now is simply that it allows you to connect with yourself at some level. It makes you whole. And it gives you a clearer picture, clearer perspective of what is happening in you and what is happening around you. And this is where, this is where we are able to take decisions. This is where we're able to work towards problem solving. This is where we're working towards finding solutions for all kind of fears that have arisen because of the COVID-19. It is especially at this time that we need to use all of that knowledge, everything that our reading of the past has given us. It is specifically around this time, at this time, we're up against the COVID-19, that we should use reading as a therapy. Thank you. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Dr. Fabian Marbanyang. Just listening to Fabian is therapeutic enough, I'm sure. And on top of that, don't forget he's sitting in Shillong, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world, by the way. So exactly where Fabian is sitting, you can imagine how beautiful it must be outside. So anyway, just listening to you. Thank you, Fabian. Reading as a therapy. Thank you from Shillong. Now we move over to Mr.
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Majau. Okay. So Mr. Nathaniel Majau will speak. He's an alumnus of Jamia Millia Islamia Mass Communication Research Center, and his topic is AV archiving in times of crisis. Yeah, Nathaniel.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you to all the faculty at VNC
Yeah.
and principal, ma'am, to the panelists. It's a great honor to be part of this panel, and I'll immediately start away. I have a presentation to share, so I hope this goes through. Let me just.
So Nathaniel, Amit this side.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I share? I am allowing you for the screen share. Okay, you can share the screen, right?
Okay.
One participant can share at a time. Yeah, please share.
Yeah. Can you all see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So hello again, everyone. My name is Nathaniel. I'm faculty at Mass Media Department in St. Anthony's College, Shillong, and also project director of something new that we've started in St. Anthony's called the North Asia Archive. So I'm going to go into this topic, and if you think that I'm digressing a bit, just be assured that I will come to my point later. Okay, so the archive is supported by the government of Meghalaya and also Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan. This is our office. We also have, because it's an audio-visual archive, we also have cubicles where you can come in and watch whatever archival material that we have at the archive. So we have to remember that this is an audio-visual archive. So let me start by a sort of a little informally, if I may, in this presentation. So we had launched on the 10th of October in 2019, and as a center, we also were looking out, as an archive, we were looking out for a lot of funds. We wanted support. We wanted, of course, the government to come on board and help us in setting up this AV archive. So we approached also the Department of Information and Public Relations, Government of Meghalaya. Okay, so that was sometime, I think, much before October, we had submitted a proposal. At the end of December, sometime the end of December, the Department of Information and Public Relations calls us, and they needed something. So this is not exactly the conversation that we had. I'm just paraphrasing here. So they said, "Hi, you are an archive." And we said, yes, we are. We're an audio-visual archive. Great, excellent. So on Meghalaya Statehood Day is coming up on the 21st of January. Please make a short film, Meghalaya, so we can screen it on that day. Chief Minister and a lot of dignitaries will be there. So we thought, okay, this is sometime, I think, at the end of December, and we thought of this mammoth task that was ahead of us and the hours of research that needs to go in, the libraries we need to visit, the people we need to interview. We're talking about Meghalaya Statehood here. And then after contemplating much, and like any organization who's asked by a potential funder, we said yes. Okay, we said definitely we can make this short film, even though we had very little time. We knew that it was very much possible, and also we had the technical expertise and the people, the personnel that we had were able and capable. So they said, great, thank you and all the best. Okay, so it started. This journey started for creating this film that we're going to make for Meghalaya Day. It's supposed to be screened on January 21st, 2020. And so as we were talking to people, going to libraries, looking at books, we did find a small reference to a song. If you see at the bottom right there, it was a song which was sung immediately after the inauguration of Meghalaya. It's called The Land of Roses. And then we remembered that one of our colleagues, Mr. Tarun Bhartia, had contributed to the archive a 1967 songbook called Kisur Kari, which means the songs, the sounds of our land. And in that book was a songbook, the song "The Land of Roses" by Victor G. Barrett. So we thought, hey, this would be a great thing to put in our film. What if we could record this song, which hasn't been heard probably for 48 years, and because the tonic sulfur was there, I mean, the notations were there, perhaps it is possible. So as we were working with trying to find the song, we also wanted to find where is the family of Victor G. Barrett. So our team did some searching, and as you all know, most of your information, your election information, your epic card is actually online. So it was not so difficult to find that Victor G. Barrett's family was in a locality called Jayao in Shillong. Okay? So we, after getting some information, this is what I did on WhatsApp, right? So on WhatsApp in our faculty paper, I said, hello, good afternoon all. Would anybody know family members of Professor G. Barrett? So, and of course, I gave some information that perhaps I think his daughter's name is, I gave the daughter's name. And then, sure enough, see, Shillong is a small place. We keep telling that to people, but we don't actually quite get it. So sure enough, somebody responded, and they actually knew the family members of the Professor Barrett, and we got the contact number. So as we were making this film, we went to the house of the children of Professor Barrett, and then it was such an amazing experience because firstly they were surprised that we found, of course, the lyrics, and we were so interested in putting the music into the film. So we got the permission of the family members, and then we went ahead and interviewed people. We recorded the song, edited the film, and on Meghalaya Day, Statehood Day, the film was screened. Okay, so more than anything else, I think what struck us the most as an archive is that the children of late Professor Barrett could see the film, and there was such an emotional experience because they've never heard, the public also have never heard the song which was sung on Statehood Day in 1972. So here, I think we really could understand what cinema can do, what film can do. Okay, so bridging this gap between the past and present through archival material really hit us back then. Okay. So in cinema, when it comes to cinema, I just want to talk from a perspective of a filmmaker or content creator. Okay? I'm not going to get into what emotional reactions you may have when you're watching a film. I want to get into talk a bit about when you are a filmmaker, when you're in that process. I think you get first-hand information, and you understand the enormous impact, the tremendous impact of what cinema can have. Now I'm going to take you to actually Japan. We're fortunate enough to visit the school in northeast of Japan, which was devastated by the tsunami in 2011, in March 2011. So this school actually was turned into a memorial. Okay, the entire school was turned into a memorial. So if you look at this picture there, you can see that the tsunami, the flood covered up to the third floor. This is called the Kesinuma City Memorial Museum. And if you walk through the museum, the local government has left this as a memorial with all the debris still inside. So this is quite unreal to us. Okay. As we walked about, we could see a car up there in the third floor, remnants of lying about. Okay, and
See the speaker.
what struck me the most actually was I can't share photos. I mean, we couldn't take photos of a small screening room where they showed us these footages of the tsunami. I'm sure all of you have seen it, but they were also unseen footage. And just behind us, there was this gentleman, Japanese gentleman, and he was sobbing when we were watching the short film, and as the tsunami was devastating the entire town of Sulma. So one thing that crossed our head at that time is, it must be very, very painful when you're talking about keeping such a center which has so many bad memories. So the guide also told us, our friends also told us that there were discussions in the local government to close the center because it brings too many bad memories. So there was a discussion. They had a discussion with the people of the town, but eventually, the people who lived through the trauma of 2011 in that town said that no, we don't want to demolish this building because if we demolish this building, we will forget. We will forget what happened to us on that day in 2011 when the tsunami came. So yes, these are very sort of tough questions when it comes to archiving a time of crisis, especially film. But we as an archive think that it is important, and more so archiving material from individuals. So so what we did as an archive is we starting this project under the archive called CLUM, archiving a pandemic in Meghalaya. We've already got our domain name, but we're yet to launch it. So what we're doing is we're collecting a lot of material from individuals, from government departments about the press releases, posters, PSAs that are being released online. And, it's important for us to do this because right now we're not really grasping on what's happening around us. So we hope that in the future, maybe 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, the material that we have can act sort of triggers to the memory and whatever we are facing here during this pandemic. So to all people who are on YouTube, on Instagram, and Facebook, especially to the students who are attending this webinar, you have to understand that we're living in very strange times, very unique times, and I can't put this out there enough that whatever you're recording, you're doing is important. Okay. Uh, so all the material, the photographs, the video that you're doing can mean something to someone out there. And perhaps, okay, we're talking about this healing process. How does this healing process come about when we're talking about cinema? This can perhaps come from material that we have cut, okay? Material that has been archived in some place. So most of the people think that archives should be administrative. Okay? Only government should have, but I encourage all of you attending the seminar. Can an archive be a personal archive? Can an archive start in our college? Because there's some material which can be safe. Okay, can be safe if it's in sort of a private hands, a private institution. So with that, I would like to end by saying that we hope that revisiting the archives and their utility will uncover formally lost truths, but more importantly, expose the fragility of memory. Thank you all, and thank you to VNC College.
Thank you, Mr. Nathaniel Majal. I cannot, I don't think he could have stressed more the importance of archiving, because everything actually depends on archiving every knowledge that we have. And the other thing is that I just, so that everybody will learn a word, the Khasi word for plague or pandemic is clum.
Yes.
KHLAM is clum. So Nathaniel is the last one. Now what we're going to do is already 4:24. We were supposed to close this at 4:30. Probably we'll stretch it to 5 if it's all right with everyone. What do you say, Amit?
Hello.
Can we stay 5?
There is some
Can you hear me, Amit?
there is some connectivity issue right now. Hello. Am I audible?
Okay, but can we continue with question answer?
Yeah, we can. Why not?
Till what time, Amit? Because now it's
Yes,
4:24. Now it's
I think we
4:24.
can continue for a little bit more time. Let's continue. Let's let everybody ask a question if they have anything
Yes.
to say.
Yes. So shall I?
I request everyone to either raise their hand or put their question on chat.
On
so
chat.
that the panelists
Raise
can
their
see
hands
the
because
questions and
nobody is
answer
going
them.
to see that. Let them put it on chat.
Yes.
So
I had already mentioned in the instructions file that if they have any questions addressed to the speakers, they can point them out on the chat section. So just waiting.
There is a question from Tarang Jain who wants to ask for some good literature that can be read. I don't know. That's a very general question. If anybody would like to take that up.
When he says good literature, what exactly are there any specifics that he's looking at? Because literature is a very, very, very wide field, and we all know that. So, what exactly is he looking at? Not that I'm saying I can suggest, but then we need more specifics here.
In the meantime, can I just share my comments, because I really enjoyed the session, and I think we looked at both the positives and the negatives that this pandemic has thrown up, and it has given us a lot to ponder over. And I do feel that yes, we who can talk of literature and the healing power of literature at this point of time are in a privileged position at the moment, because we are not grappling with absolutely survival questions of hunger and need. And Sachin very rightly pointed out that there is also a kind of brutalization that has been there always in our society, that has been present. And we can only hope that Father Alex's optimism that things will turn for the better may be true, although Sachin doesn't seem to share that optimism. And I think some of us also find it difficult to believe that things can improve. But I think that pandemics always show us all aspects of humanity. We see the best and we see the worst of human beings, and that is what even literature or films about pandemics show us. And it actually depends on an individual how we respond to a situation. And I think that is what literature probably helps us do, as I think Fabian pointed out extremely interestingly. It's how we respond to a situation, how we are able to empathize, how we are able to come together in such a situation, which is valuable. And we hope that these are the lessons that we carry rather than the other ones. Thank you so much for all that you said. Thank you.
Sachin, there is a question for you. Sachin, can you hear me?
Sachin.
I don't know whether he's there or not.
Yeah, Sachin.
Sachin, do you see the question on chat?
Yes.
Can you answer them? He wants to. Do you think that COVID will lead to further governmental scrutiny and invasion of our private space? Will it further lead to worsening communalization of the minorities?
Unfortunately, I think so. That is the problem. In fact, what Hina was trying to share right now, the problem is these two things, the positive and the negative are there in front of us, juxtaposed together. So while I completely understand Dr. Fabian's stress on reading as therapy or reading as therapeutic. I'll just point out one instance where reading is punitive. You know, when we all tried to read the preamble of the Constitution 3-4 months back, or maybe we all have lost track of time. But when we all teachers, students, and the common public tried to read the preamble of the Constitution of this country, there were coercive, repressive, punitive action, invoked by the state. So while in our private, we are all in one sense Madame Bovary, victims of fiction, and Erika Jong talked about Madame Bovary as victim of a fiction victim. But while we all enjoy our private therapeutic moments, the collective, the public is often very repressive, and even the private can become turn into an occasion for repressive action on the part of the state. Suppose we record, a reading of the, preamble of the Constitution. I'm not talking about any fantastic literature that may, ruffle, feathers per se. But when you read the preamble of this Constitution in this country, if the state can come down on you and make it, an act of, act of punitive, reprobation, then there is something worrying about what is happening around us. The entire situation, Garima's question to me, and I also see Shefali Rathor's question more or less on the same line. Yes, of course, there is this question of rumor, manipulation of the media, what kind of access we all have. What about the lockdown in Kashmir? The lockdown in Kashmir has been on for almost 270 days. What about the many kinds of lockdowns that are around us? How do we respond to all these things? Most of the time, we are indifferent. We show a certain kind of callous apathy to all these issues. But right now, we all feel that all these lockdowns and restrictions on individual freedom are all becoming a question that concerns all of us. Why? Because many of these things have come home to roost. I believe that the progressive offers implicit movement. So of course, I'm not saying that this pandemic is the creation of a particular nation, but you look at the ruling party in this country and the ruling president in America talks about virus. At least from the 2011 onwards, WHO has obviously tried to avoid naming viruses after regions or nationalities and things like that. But they continue to use this as Chinese virus. And we all, seem to be okay with it, even when we have a proper nomenclature for it. So I believe there is, more to come, because we have lost touch with the basic idea of a constitutional republic. So that's my take on it. I think I more or less answered what Garima and Shefali wanted me to clarify.
Just a minute. I'm going to interrupt because there's a very interesting question to anybody who wants to answer, and this is for the artists. Okay, people turn to art, in crisis. But do you think it's going to make any difference to conditions of artists? Perhaps there would be a temporary change in the way people are perceiving art right now. But again, those product, all this art, is it going to make any difference to their earnings, which is very, very important, and positions in society? Please, Fabian, can you can you answer that, please? Thanks.
On that, okay, I like that, and whoever asked that question, thank you very much for that question. And again, Dr. Sachin, thank you so much for your comments just now. I find that real. I find the situation can be very threatening. And how is that related to art? This is my take on it. Okay. Looking again at us, who do not really have to run down for our earnings with the salary. Okay, that's a real picture for us. Okay, but this is where we play a role. This is where we play a role. Art is a form of expression. And I'm looking at writing, of course, and I'm looking at reading, and I'm looking at these language skills we're talking about. I'm looking at painting, and I'm looking at cinematography. I'm looking at whatever form of expression that we have. The responsibility here is such people with this kind of background need to voice out. You cannot, we're coming down to daily wage earners, which Sophia just now just mentioned as something out of the question. How does that affect the earnings? Those people would definitely go probably with, there'll be a breakout, there'll be a hartal, there would be protests in the street. But not that that I am being condescending, but I'm saying they are in a position to use force, which is fine, because that's how they know how to go about things. But people from our kind of background are people who can actually reach higher levels, people at decision level making people in government, with the kind of expressions that we can come across, we can put forth across, because of the reading that we've done, because of the experience that we've done, because of the statistics that we can show, because of, we have enough background knowledge. We're supposed to be having enough background knowledge to voice out. This is how it affects the earnings of everyone, if I've answered that question right. So.
Thanks. I hope it's answered the question. And shall we wind up? I mean, it's 4:36 already. I think we've exceeded the time. Is there anyone else who wants to say something? Somebody's asked one last question. Sachin, please suggest some movies. Somebody's asked. Okay, Sachin, you have movies to suggest?
No. I don't have movie subscriptions, but I thought, it's important to acknowledge what Nathaniel and his team has been doing there. So I just wanted my 10 seconds to do that. What they are doing in Shillong, building an audiovisual archive about things, that's very important. And of course, there are other things, it's not just the Tablighi Jamaat or communalization of Muslims. We also saw how, I normally don't use that, but how people from Northeast was wantonly targeted in Delhi and many other places, saying that, they are the carriers of, coronavirus.
Yeah.
So, many of these terms, super spreader, all these things, are inching us towards a new normal, where all kinds of pandemic brutalities are condoned and are accepted. So that's the worrying thing. So all I can suggest is watch a lot of pirated movies, download stuff, use the internet in democratization of art and learning and education. Don't subscribe to Netflix or Amazon Prime en masse. If there is one subscription, share the password and spread that kind of system all around us. Thank you.
Anyway, to end the seminar, if anybody is wanting, suggestions to for a movie, because we're not, I don't watch Hindi movies very seldom. But if there is a movie that you really need to watch,
can I just come in?
Ask Nathaniel. He'll suggest movies.
No, I don't have any suggestions. Rather, I'd have no suggestion for movies, but rather maybe the student asked this, and especially the one who asked for a suggestion. I think this is a perfect watch. Start creating your own. I think we're living in a very unique time, and your opinion, your take on whatever's happening around is matters. Okay, and it's going to be very different maybe after all this ends. I think if you start recording yourself, take an interview of yourself. I think that's something I would suggest rather than films.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Father Alex Katakayam, Fabian, Nathaniel. Beautiful sky right now, beautiful air. We don't even have to think of pollution. I think, the most important message we take back from this webinar is respect the environment. The environment is above religion, is above people, is actually above academics. And probably what Nathaniel said, you take the suggestion, please, from my side, go and archive the nature that you're seeing today, because you will never see it again. So take it from me that instead of watching movies, like Nathaniel was saying, go and film the things that you see around you, because you're never going to see this time again. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. We've tried our best. I mean, the guys from Shillong, sometimes they get very reticent, but they did this for my sake, because they believed in me, and I believe in them, and I hope, and Father Alex, especially, thank you, Father. I mean, is there anything you want to say to everyone before it ends, Alex? Maybe we can conclude by a word from Alex. No, he can be heard. He's not. Yeah.
Very relevant topic, something that we need to discuss, something that we need to continue discussing. And as Nathaniel says, it's only after a certain period of time in proximity, we don't realize importance of it. But after a certain amount of time has passed, we will know, we are able to look back at it and say, oh my, such a wonderful thing, or such a thing had happened, and we have learned lessons from it. Now we are too close to it, so we are not able to learn. But these discussions, I'm sure, it will carry forward some initiatives in us. It will spark some ideas in us, whether it is by way of archiving it, or by way of critiquing it, or by way of reading, writing, engaging ourselves in creative literature, etc. Wonderful idea, wonderful time that we had, an hour and a half. Thank you for organizing once again, Sophia, and to Ma'am Hina, and to the entire department at Vivekananda in Delhi.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Hina, as principal of our college. Thank you, everyone, Amit, and everybody for joining in. I don't know if we will ever do this again. Let's hope we survive the virus. Please, please, please pray that we survive the virus at least. Because religion may not, religion may have answers to a few things, but if we're dead, we're dead with the virus. So if we're dead, dead. So I think stay safe, be safe. Everyone, please stay safe, be safe. And I will end by saying that, peace and love. I really mean that. I carry this message wherever I go, as a teacher and as a human being. Peace and love to yourself and to nature. Okay, over now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope to see you again, all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Peace and love. You know that about me. Okay. Thank you. Bye, Nathaniel. Fabian. Yeah, thank you.